Alright, hey everybody, so welcome to a video that I'm doing more of a deep dive than my previous video that was about mostly maximizing DPS. I talked about simming a bit in that video, and I didn't talk specifically about, how to run a sim and what a sim is good for. I just kind of showed you, how to use a gear optimizer to Ask Mr. Robot. A few people were curious, like, which options are better, what's the best way to do things, and why even sim in the first place. I'll be honest, I don't know if simming is that important when you use things like the gear optimizer. It is if you want to get super min-maxed on absolutely everything. Honestly, you can just kind of go with like the best gear calculators that are out there, and you'll be in pretty good shape. What we'll do is we'll start with Simulation Craft and use that to get a baseline for how simulations work, and then we'll go from that, and then we'll do a deep dive into raid bots, and then we'll talk about Ask Mr. Robot, and then I'll just kind of give you my idea on, what my ratings are for the different tools that are out there, and we'll do a quick comparison. Starting with Simulation Craft, you'll need the add-on itself, which will give you a string that you can copy, which I just copied, and then you're going to need the program Simulation Craft, where you can import what you just copied. So if you go to import SimC add-on, and you can paste in your export, and then you can hit simulate. And then you'll get a whole bunch of information. One nice thing about this is it's quick. It's really fast to do a single sim, and you can do as many as you want. If you're asking why would you want to do multiples, it's because when you simulate, you'll get a different number every time. So you can look at these numbers like 31,546 DPS, compare that to the last iteration, 31,499. Every time you do it, you're going to get something a little bit different, because that's just the way the numbers work, or the randomness of the numbers work. You get a pretty good idea of how things are going to work, and it'll tell you what the error is, some usually less than 1%, somewhere around like 0.2%. What we're going to end up doing is just to get an idea of how things work. Your 31,546 DPS, that's pretty self-explanatory. The DTPS error, if you actually click on each one of these things, it'll tell you what everything is. So damage taken per second per active player duration. That tells you, how much damage you're going to take per second. It'll tell you your healing per second and your TMI. TMI is, I believe, like your tank. It's how much damage you can mitigate. So this is important for tanks. That's important for DPS and tanks. And healing per second. If you're a blood DK like me, these are all important to you. For the most part, though, you care if you're DPS about this DPS number, and maybe a little bit about your healing per second. If you're healing, you care about the healing per second, and a little bit about the TMI, not so much about the DPS, unless you're a disciplined priest. So, you know what? There's all kinds of combinations and things out there. You can use this information however you want. It'll also it'll give you all kinds of graphs about like how much damage per second you're doing throughout the fight, when like your spikes are going to be, all that kind of thing. Tell you what the majority of your damage should be coming from. In my case, should be coming mostly from Blood Drinker, a good amount from Death Strike, a lot from that. And it'll also tell you down here what actions you should be taking, and what your rotation will be. So you go action priority list. So it tells you use a flask, do food, use your augment rune, and then some snapshot stuff here. And then you're going to be auto attacking, you're going to use some items, and just pretty much it tells you all the things to go through. I find it interesting that it has something like consumption in here, but anyway, the point is it tells you pretty much everything that you should be doing. That's pretty much all Simulation Craft is. There's a lot of things you can play with. You can actually come in here and change some of these numbers. Like if you wanted to see the difference between like changing out, a piece of gear or changing out a gem, you could just kind of change the numbers for the gem, and that would let you change the gem out without actually going and buying the gem and putting it in somewhere. If you wanted to check like different gear, how it would work, or a different enchant, you would basically just put the other piece of gear on. So I'll just change out my legs, for example. I'm in combat, of course. Why wouldn't I be? Let me move away from this thing, because clearly the training dummy is mad at me. So I'll change out my legs here, and then I'll do another copy from the SimCraft window, and then another import, copy, paste, and then we'll simulate. And then you can compare what the difference is between the two. So 31,546, 31,728 DPS. My heals per second go down a little bit, and my tanking stays about the same. So would I want to use these pants? Well, maybe. I mean, the corruption's probably going to help out a little bit. Then, of course, you got to worry about, different corruption stuff. So there's all kinds of different things to take into account with this corruption gear, which I really like. But we'll see some options where you can kind of deal with as much corruption as you're comfortable with and build that into your optimizer for the gear. Next thing, raid bots. So raid bots is going to use the same information that you use from SimCraft, which is kind of nice. So we'll pull up our raid bot site here. Now, raid bots, to do much of anything, you need to have an account. When you do Sims or anything, you're using raid bots as servers. And that's kind of slow because you have to send the data to their servers, and then you have to let their servers do their processing, and then it sends it back to your machine. So it's not the fastest. It is fairly accurate, I think. Just to start off, we'll do like a quick sim using the information I showed from that original sim. And you basically go in this window, paste it in, and you can set any number of options here. The main thing is when you're comparing your sims, make sure your fight length's the same and your fight style should be like patchwork or whatever type of thing. You can honestly make it whatever. I'm going to use target dummy just because. Actually, no, I'm going to use patchwork because it's easier. Yeah, and then you go ahead and run a quick sim. And this is the part where if you didn't have... So I'm paying for the Epic version of this site. So I go right to the front and I can use a lot of their servers, so it goes pretty quick. Here's the downside right here. So tanks and healers, sim DPS only, they don't worry about survival or healing. So that kind of sucks. That's kind of a big down check for me for raid bots, because I typically tank or heal. DPS a little bit, but more often than not I'm tanking. So to not have it be able to do anything with tanking is kind of bad. So it kind of rules out raid bots for me right off the bat. But if you're DPSing, you can still use it. Yeah, it gives you a quick sim. And this number is actually a little bit lower than the other one, which I think was like 31. So, it decided on a little bit different of a damage bit for me, so that's fine. Some other options that you have here, you can do some stat weights, where it will it'll generate a stat weight for the pawn add-on. So if you just go ahead and do your stat weights, again, it will take some time, and I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can make that go away. Nope, it's on this window. So, yep, fun times waiting for processing. See, this is where like simulation craft shines, because you don't have to wait forever for it to do anything like this. And again, I don't know if you can do stat weights like this with simulation craft. But anyway, so you can take this and you can paste that into your pawn add-on, and it'll reconfigure what stats it's weighing for you, so that you have a better idea of what's going to actually be an upgrade. All right, so that being said, we'll try another option. You can do talent compare. Talent compare is actually pretty cool. So you could actually come in here and you can make different talent sets. So let's say I want to look and see, what's a better talent set. Do I want to use Heartbreaker maybe? I can duplicate it again, and I can do Ruin Strike. I can duplicate it again. Maybe instead of Hemostasis, I want to see, maybe Consumption will do better. What if I do Consumption plus my current thing? We'll just give it a couple different options. And then we'll go ahead and compare talents. And then it's going to go do the thing that it has to do. Waiting. The more things you select, by the way, the longer this takes, and there is actually a limit to how many things you can pick, which, kind of sucks. Because if you want to do a lot of things at once, it's annoying. Alright, so by doing that, I can tell, looks like this is my best option right here, which was using... I'm not sure what the difference between these two is. It looks to be the same. Maybe these are different iterations. I don't know. Oh, this is what, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, the point is, what I've got right now looks to be the best option. That's kind of useful. I'll give you an idea of how things work. You have the Droptimizer, which you can use to tell you, you could pick a different areas, and you can figure out what the best gear for you in those areas are, which is, it's not bad. Like if you're looking for Mythic Plus and you want to find, I don't know, let's say we do a Mythic 11, no, 10. I thought 10 drops course. Nah, whatever. We'll go ahead and just, leave that as it is, and it will tell us the best things we can get. Sure, let's run and see what I can get. It's not going to be super useful because it's not doing this for tanking, by the way. It's doing this based on DPS only, but why not? Let's see what happens. Okay, so here we go. This will tell us what the best options are for things that it can drop, and it looks like, as far as DPS goes, it wants me to get a Tiku, which is not that surprising. It also wants me to get these ritual bandages, which again, not super surprising. And even the ritual binders, whatever the heck, so that's not surprising either. So, plenty of cool stuff. Unfortunately, doesn't have very much in the means of like tanking, which, not a big fan of. But it is what it is. So, all that being said, there's a lot of different options here, and that's, kind of nice to have, because you can get a pretty good idea of what the next best thing to do is, and what you want to target. It'd be better if it, did tanking, but it didn't, so cool, moving on. And then you can do gear compare, which is, where you can basically compare different things. Well, you can kind of pick from anything that you want to look at. So you can put in 2 different sets, and that's pretty much it. It'll just compare the 2 based on your simming. Neat. And then the last option here is the top gear option. And I'm going to copy everything over here. There we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and I can basically pick all these different, oh my. Down here, you're going to notice that there's a lot of numbers here. So depending on how many things you pick, you can essentially max out the number of things that you're using, which is kind of annoying. So, and these don't matter. Let's say that I pick, I want to check out of all the stuff in my bag, I want to see what the best options are. So just by picking everything in my bags right now, I'm up to 2,840,000 combinations. That doesn't include the gems, that doesn't include the enchants. If I try to do the enchants, I have too many combinations. Now, I will tell you right now, if you don't use, this also doesn't include which essences you're using, because those are going to be on a different set, as well as your talents that you're using. If you're not paying for the top tier version, you're not going to have 16 million possible combinations for you to be able to do. You're going to have significantly less. So that is one of the biggest downsides I have on raid bots, is you can't compare that many things, and that kind of sucks. But we'll let this go ahead and do its simulation for a little bit. Alright, so based on this, it agrees with everything I have. So cool. I'm glad I've got everything best equipped. Now I will tell you that this is based on, this gear set is the exact same one I got from Ask Mr. Robot, so they do agree there. Ask Mr. Robot actually, I think, maybe changed a couple different things, because it does the tanking part of the things, and it will kind of try to decide, based on whether you're trying to do mythics or raids, what's going to be more important to you, staying alive or doing some damage. And depending on your level of mythics, you may want to do more damage, you may want to do less damage, you might want to just be able to survive longer. So a lot of different options, and we'll move on to Ask Mr. Robot now, because I think we've pretty much seen everything that this can do. And for Mr. Robot, there are, again, many options and many things that you can do. So if you want to optimize, you can do a best in bags, you can do an upgrade finder, you can do worst in bags, you can do gear check, you can do best in slot. The thing is, it does use a different add-on, so that's a little bit different. If it used SimCraft, that'd be kind of nice, but it doesn't, so whatever. I'm not gonna really knock them on that. They made their own thing, so whatever. You basically do the same kind of thing. You come in here, you can do import from add-on. Now, I am paying the $1 a month for my subscription here. I think that's worth it, personally. That's pretty cheap. And you actually can do a thing with your guild where if everybody in your guild wants to pay, well, not everybody, if like 5 people in your guild want to donate $5 out of the month, then you can actually pay for your whole guild, for $5 a month, which is pretty cool. We'll start with, let's start with the simulates. So we'll simulate a single character real quick. I can paste in my info, and we'll just leave everything pretty close to the default. The one thing I will do specifically is I'll make the fight length 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes, and it's going to have no variance, so it'll be 5 minutes exactly, and simulate. Now you will notice that this happens a little bit quicker than raid bots, and here you go. For tanking, it will in fact give you a tough score, so that's pretty nice. I don't have a DPS score right away, which is kind of annoying. I would like to know. Well, oh look, you can go and switch to damage, and hey, it tells my damage per second. So that's significantly lower than what the other two sims said. And say it's on Big Boss. So yeah, it's significantly different. And if we compare the two, so let's do a quick sim again. So these two things are obviously not the same. 24,370 DPS is saying 29,915. This is saying that a good bit of the damage is going to be done by the Echoing Void part of my corruption. It's a corruption ability. I mean, they're both pretty close in that. That is really going to be, like, this is kind of randomish. It's not really random, but this is kind of hard to say. I might be able to, if I rerun this, I'm curious like what the difference will be if it says it does more damage than the melee this time. Yeah, still says it does less damage, but so they look at different things. You can really compare these all day and try to figure out which one's right. I don't know. It's not that important to me, honestly. I mean, obviously there's a difference here of, let's see, about 5,000 DPS, so I don't know which one's actually right. I would tend to go with the 29 as being more accurate, but then again, I typically single target. I think I do something like 2,600, but let's see what the difference is here. I got a target dummy over here. We can go ahead and pretend like we're gonna fight, and let's see what my actual damage per second is. After, I'm not gonna do this for like a whole 300 seconds. I guess I could, but it looks like my damage is hovering around 26, 24. So single target around 24. I don't have any raid buffs on, so that might be part of this also. Like, I don't have a flask, I'm not using any potions, I'm not using a raid, I don't have any raid buffs. So there's a few different things that could play into this. The thing I'm kind of mostly interested in is what does more damage, my melee strike or my procs from Echoing Shadows or whatever the heck that corruption thing is. It's a collapsing void, I don't know. So we'll see here in a moment. Alright, so looks like the damage didn't come anywhere close to what either of them said. But then again, I'm not using anything. Now, Echoing Void definitely did more damage. Melee Strike definitely did the second most amount of damage, and Death Strike definitely did the third amount. So I think they're both pretty close. Well, I mean, neither of them is close in actual damage, but I would say that raid bots actually nailed the real world Echoing Void part of that a lot better. I think it's more up to date with the changes to that. In fact, there you go, Echoing Void change. So that might have something to do with that being more correct. because this I think is always probably going to be more than the main, or more than just the white melee strikes. Other than that, it looked like it was pretty accurate. I think they just need to redo their sim or their calculation for Echoing Void, because it clearly is doing more damage than they're giving it credit for. That being said, let's go ahead and look at some of the other options here in Ask Mr. Robot. If we look at some of the other simulation options, you can do gearing strategy. This is kind of where, well, not gearing strategy, sorry, test combinations. This is kind of where AMR shines in comparison to raid bots, because with this you can actually do a lot of different combinations. So you can actually come in here, and I can put all 3 of these in there right now. I can actually select all of these. Select all these different talents. And this would actually be a problem for the other stuff. I can select all the different essences if I wanted to. I'm not going to bother, and then I can select, all the different weapons that I have, or any weapon really. I can select different chants. I'll select Stone Skin Gargoyle or Fallen Crusader. Stats, I'm not gonna play with too much, but for like the gear, I could do everything down to like the gems. We'll say, I'll just throw that in there as an option. I'll add, that as an option, whatever. And that gives me a good number of setups, and it'll tell you need the sim client. So this is kind of where things get a little bit weird. So for Ask Mr. Robot, it doesn't use its own servers to do the simulations. It'll actually use your own machine if the simulation is too big for the website to handle. So you can log into this program, and then you'll be ready, and it'll say waiting for you to submit a simulation. So if I do my simulation, run a simulation, then I can look back at this, and it'll start to spit out some data once it starts to do the simulations. All right, well that's going. I'm gonna go ahead and do a previous. We're gonna look at the optimizer functions in Ask Mr. Robot. So I touched on these a little bit during my last video. Let's look at some of these in a bit more depth now. So I'm gonna make sure I've got the copies here, and we'll look at best in bags. So for tanking, there we go, let's switch things around. One of the nice features of Ask Mr. Robot is you can put your different specs in different places on the list here. And in theory, I say in theory because I don't know if it works if it really does work that well. I've had a couple little weird issues with it. But in theory, you put your best spec on the top or your main spec on top, and it will find best in bags, and it will spit out the combinations in such a way that you can have 2 sets of gear, or it'll, just basically give you the best setup for what you have in your bags, and, for both your specs. So you can choose between Raid tanking or Mythic Plus. I'm going to go with Mythic Plus, and I'm going to say like I'm doing a 10. And then I'm going to do Find Best in Bags. Now, also some of the things you want to look at here, I would typically set this Azurite threshold to disabled because, yeah, we don't want to mess with that too much. And if changing gems or enchants do not increase your score by at least as much, leave them as is. Let's leave that disabled. If you disable both those, it'll give you the absolute best thing no matter what, which is, useful. You can mess with these if you want, if you don't want to have to mix your gems up very much. This is pretty much what you would do. And all right, there we go. Find best in bags. It's telling me so it wants me to change out my gem here to crit and my, is that not already versatility? Oh, it's mastery on that one. So it wants me to change that to versatility, change the 3 of these to crit, so I just have 3 crit gems instead of a haste and a versatility gem. And it also wants me to get rid of my strength gem, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the reason it doesn't make a whole lot of sense is because you can look at this and, well, I don't know, maybe. Based on its numbers, it thinks a crit gem is going to be better than a strength gem. It's going to be equal to a versatility gem, so if I left it as versatility, okay. If I left that as versatility, okay. And if I left that as versatility, okay. Basically, these 2 things are even in the eyes of this, so whatever, doesn't really make that much of a difference. But we can unlock everything and re-optimize, and okay. So it'll also tell you the best Azurite traits for whatever you got and all that kind of junk. And it'll do the same for your op spec as well, which is helpful. Alright, so if I look at the differences, obviously there's not much difference between this and raid bots because it kept the same gear, just changed some of the gems and enchants around. I didn't check the gems and enchants on raid bots because it takes a long time for that to sim. Speaking of which, okay, so we got, alright, this is looking like it's going to take a little while still. So this is one of the downsides of this, is it does take a long time for you to sim certain things. I mean, the plus side, you can do this, you can just kind of set a sim and you can set as big of a sim as you want. You can sim the freaking world and you'll know the exact best of everything, but it's going to take a while. So as long as you have the time to, do it, more power to you. But anyway, so that's pretty much how the optimizer works. It's pretty good. It's pretty useful. You can get, information based on toughness and damage. You can get, specific values over here. If you are... The only thing it doesn't really give you is like a number when you do it like this, which, it's okay. It's basically just giving you a score, like what the difference is if you do this. Like if you do what it says here, what will the difference be in your percentage? So, it's okay. Some other options here. You can do a gear check where it talks about, what's the best thing to have in your... Let me set this to 10. It'll tell you what the best gems you can put stuff are, and see, in this case, it's telling me just do all versatility gems, which is interesting. So it gives me different things. It wants me to have less crit and less haste, so I don't know, it's interesting. There are definitely some weird little quirks to Ask Mr. Robot. It will tell you what it thinks is best, and it will tell you what it thinks is second best sometimes. So, I like the people that are running Ask Mr. Robot, the person I talked to that took the time out of their day to kind of walk me through a lot of things. They gave me a lot of good info, and they told me a lot about how things work, which I appreciate. But there's definitely a lot of quirks. And the good news is that if you tell them, hey, I found this, they will look into it and try to get an idea of what's going on. And I did point out to him sometimes that this type of thing does happen, where you do the best in bags finder, and it will in fact give you, for some reason, it'll pick things that are a lower score. So yeah, there are some weird things, so just be aware of that. All right, now if you want to define what's best in your slot based on the thing that you can do, this is a pretty useful tool. So let's say that the most you're going to do is Mythic 10. You want to find whatever. You can say like, all right, I'm going to get rid of all these mythic things. I'm only going to do mythic dungeons, right? So there you go. And you can say your mythic plus level is going to be 10. So you can look for whatever gear you can find based on, what you're going to be able to get. Yeah, so this is going to tell you, go ahead and get, oh look, World Drop, I can get that from, let's look at that. So this will tell you what the best thing you can find depending on what you're doing is. So apparently I can go to Darkshore and find this greatsword somewhere. I'm going to have to look into that because that looks pretty cool. Maybe I'm not the best, maybe not the best thing out there, but not bad. And then you get some different items here, different stuff. I don't know how I feel about some of this. But anyway, these are some different options that are out there. If I wanted to, I bet if I changed the strategy to Mythic 10, it would focus more on damage. Try that. Also bear in mind that this is not looking at like the stuff you get from Nyalotha. So if I wanted to be more accurate to what I'm really doing, I'd say heroic and normal Nyalotha and see what kind of stuff it gives me. I would think that I get some Azurite pieces that have Heart of Darkness in them. Yep, there's one. Yeah, I mean, there's a few different options here. You can kind of get an idea of what you want to go for in terms of, like Shul Vaz. So that's a pretty good weapon. Really, that's a pretty good one. And you can get that from out. I definitely want that at some point. So much. I want that so much. Anyway, maybe next week. This is a pretty good tool also, and it will also help you out when you're looking at things like, you know, you want to max out you don't want to have a higher corruption level than whatever. So if I increase this to like 80, because I know there's some of those top tier raiders right now that their blood DKs are running with like 80 some corruption or 90 corruption, like some ridiculous number. Like, yeah, they're doing some great things. Yeah, so based on the changes there, you might be able to get different thing like, ooh, Devastation's Hour, plus 75 corruption. Wow. Pretty cool. But anyway, really there's just all kinds of options here, and you can find out a lot by playing around with this. So in addition to best in five bags, you can do what I was just showing you there. You can do the best in slot, you can do the upgrade finder. And then there's the best in slot option, which you pretty much, well, I already looked at that. Upgrade finder. All right, so this is telling you what you can find if you use a bonus roll on different things. So if you're going to use a bonus roll, this is where you want to use it, essentially. So, you know, Heroic N'Zoth, be a good place to use a bonus roll. It's pretty obvious. Normal N'Zoth, pretty good place to use a bonus roll, obviously. And then Mount would be a great place to use a bonus roll, and that's mostly because of, for me, you know, that axe that I really, really want. And then Queen Azshara actually even has some stuff, which is the Final Power that people seem to really like. I don't know. I guess it's a good trinket. I'm just not a big fan of it. A lot of good options here, and then there's a couple things that are hard to find. Oh, worse than bags, by the way. That's cool. It can tell you which things you can get rid of. It will be pointless to ever have. So a couple things in here that are kind of hidden. If you go into guides and go to things like Death Knight, in my example, like Blood Death Knight, you can actually see some things here where it'll tell you, based on Ask Mr. Robot simulations, what it thinks are the best talents to pick. So kind of similarly to how Raidbots has it set up. Is this done yet? Is it still going? Good lord. I'm not even gonna bother showing you what the result is, because I don't even care. It's gonna take too long. So here we are with you can basically plan this out. So like you pick Rune Strike, then you pick that, and then you pick, you know, whichever one that. I don't necessarily know if that's a particularly good. I like to have this one myself, but I can see where that would be useful. And he wants you to have that instead of Will and Necropolis. Some of these talents are very situational. And then obviously Bloodworms is a good one. And then once you have Purgatory, that's another weird one I'm not like a big fan of. I would much rather have that. So like if I go with my current talent setup, like that, yeah, it's saying it's really low ranked, which is kind of weird. Yeah. And the synergy it has with your essences, that's another thing altogether. So I don't know how. I mean, I've tried the optimum setup it has here. It's not bad. I just don't think it's as good as the one I use. Maybe that's just because I'm used to it. It's really hard to say. You can also look at these and figure out, you know, what you want to pick for your essences. Like your major essence, you know, what the effect is going to be. I think Sphere of Suppression is not a super good one. Yeah, that's not a very good major. It's not a very good major essence at all. That's a good minor essence because of the haste and the and mostly the haste. And like rank 1 being above rank 3, that doesn't even make sense. Like why would that be a thing? Like this seems like it's not right. So I will give you, there are definitely problems with how some of these guides work. So I wouldn't look at these too deeply because, yeah, I mean, this right here should tell you this makes no damn sense. Rank 1 should not be above 2 and 3, because 2 and 3 have the same thing that rank 1 has, just more of it. So, but if you're looking at, I mean, this is right here as far as like the best one. Rank 3 Memory Lucid Dreams. That is a very good one for Mythic Plus. Not necessarily for raid tanking. It's really good for Mythic Plus, not so much raid tanking. For raid tanking, I tend to take something such as Touch of the Everlasting for the corruption, plus you get to, ignore death a couple times, which in a few of the fights is really useful. Or Nullification Dynamo is amazing because of the being able to remove harmful magic and block magic, so there's some really good fights. So a lot of these are situational anyway, but yeah, there's all kinds of talents, and it's going to be hard to like really find the absolute best one of these. There really isn't one. Same thing with talents. There really isn't an always one size fits all best. So I'm not going to give them too much flack over, but it's not that great. All right, so onto the comparison part of this. So when you compare all three of these options, there's pros and cons to all of them. Honestly, I like the best in bags feature a lot better in Ask Mr. Robot. I mean, it wins hands down for tanks because it does for tanks. It works for tanks. It does have some weird wonky stuff like I showed though, so you do have to kind of like understand the ins and outs of things, and you have to, you have to basically pick things that you know make sense, because there are times when it tries to, like right here, I could pick this right here and that would make more sense, right? Like, hold on. Ooh, I managed to duplicate things. A duplicate. Let me do another find best in bags real quick. Yeah, so I understand why, like, this is a higher score, but that's because it's being used by my other gear set. But let's say, like, let me look at my pants. I was doing this the other day. I don't know if it still will be. No, it's not. Sometimes it'll have gear that makes more sense to have. Yeah, like right here, for example. So it would let me pick this, which is better in its opinion, but it won't tell me to pick it. I have to just kind of figure that out on my own, and then that'll change some other things. And the reason it'll change those things is because it wants me to have a different amount of corruption. And that's kind of probably part of the problem, is the balancing act of the corruption right now. It's really, I would imagine it's fairly hard to calculate because there's so many variables. I'll give them kind of a pass on that. For the most part, if you're doing a single spec, this works really, really well. And I don't have a whole lot of problem with it. I mean, this kind of stuff right here is pretty weird. The gem strategy is real weird, but it does work pretty well. So, and if you're looking for something quick, this is awesome because you can just quickly come in here, toss your stuff in, and it'll tell you, like, you need to do all of this, which is nice. For raid bots, it's got a lot of good stuff for it. If you're doing DPS, if you're solely worried about DPS, this is a good one to use. The only downside, and probably the biggest downside in my opinion, is the price. So to be able to use most of these features, you need to pay at least, I think, $5 a month. If you want to be able to sim, with any decent speed, you need to pay the $10 a month. And that to me is just not worth the price of admission. I would much rather just pay the $1 a month or $5 a month for an entire guild for Ask Mr. Robot. And, I guess that's kind of a preference thing, but it's my preference. When it comes to simming, they both do a good single sim. I think Ask Mr. Robot was closer in its numbers, but the way it got to the numbers wasn't really right. And Rainbots was closer as in, which thing does more damage, but its numbers were way too high. So from talking to the people at Ask Mr. Robot, they tell me that their numbers, when it does its simulations, they're based more on real world scenario with that, takes into account things like, player error and like latency and things like that. So they use more of a real world scenario, whereas, raid bots and Simcraft, they are just going off of, somebody does absolutely perfect every time, which is definitely not a thing that's going to be possible all the time. The end verdict here, my end verdict, is if you are looking to use a simulator to figure out what the best gear you have is, I'm going to go with Ask Mr. Robot. Simply because it's cheaper, it seems to be about as accurate, maybe slightly more than raid bots, and it's got just some better features built into it. So it does have some wonkiness, but you can overcome it. Anyway, appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for checking out this kind of a long video that I've done on this. I hope you found it really helpful. If there's more questions that you have, things that you want to know, please put them in the comments below. I'd love to see if I can find an answer, because, you know, if I don't get you an answer, I might be able to ask people that I had talked to previously about some of these. And until then, try not to die.